9/11 suspects showed defiance at a court hearing in Guantanamo Bay. Some are calling this the most important military tribunal since Nuremberg. But can the defendants expect a fair trial? And how will al-Qaeda supporters respond to the proceedings? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Taimur Nabili. Now, the self-proclaimed mastermind of the September 11th attacks, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and 4 other accused terrorists have appeared before a military tribunal in Guantanamo Bay. The trial got off to a chaotic start, with the defendants refusing to acknowledge the judge and their lawyers repeatedly questioning the legitimacy of the court. Now, the US has gone to great lengths to rebrand this trial process, tightening the rules of evidence and restricting the use of hearsay, leading many to question whether the men can receive a fair trial. From Guantanamo Bay, Rosalind Jordan reports.
In courtroom number 2, the initial hearing of the 9/11 defendants was a marathon confrontation of defense lawyers and the judge. A verbal outburst, praying in the middle of the hearing, stripping off a shirt to show scars allegedly inflicted by U.S. soldiers. This was the arraignment for the 5 men accused of planning and financing the September 11th attacks. At the front table, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the accused mastermind of the plot, charged with 8 crimes, including conspiracy and murder in violation of the law of war. Behind him, 4 co-defendants, also facing the same charges, which could lead to their execution. They put off entering pleas to the charges, and they ignored every question Judge James Pohl asked them. The defendant's lawyers also spent several hours grilling Pohl about his qualifications to hear the case. Defense lawyer Cheryl Borman wore an abaya and asked Pohl to order the female prosecutors to wear similar clothes out of respect for the defendant's Muslim faith. And at early evening, Walid Ben Attash's demand that the 87-page charge sheet be read out loud for the record. Some of the relatives watching at Guantanamo cried while the charges were read. Others watching via closed-circuit television in New York and Massachusetts said what they saw in the courtroom disgusted them.
I think people like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, if they could have come back and told him, we killed 50 children today, he'd have said, wonderful, praise Allah. I say, damn you.
And then this insult at the end of the night. Ramzi Ben Al-Sheib waving at the victims' relatives through the bulletproof glass. One of the decisions reached during Saturday's arraignment is that everyone will be back in the courtroom the week of June 12th. In the meantime, prosecutors and defense lawyers will be filing a slew of motions, hoping to sway justice toward their side. Rosalind Jordan, Al Jazeera, Guantanamo Bay, Cuba.
Well, can these proceedings at Guantanamo Bay deliver real justice? For more on this, I'm joined by 3 guests. In Washington, D.C., Richard Weitz is a senior fellow and director at the Center for Political Military Analysis at the Hudson Institute. In London, Jeremy Corbyn is a member of Parliament. In the Labour Party, he's also chair of the Parliamentary Human Rights Group and chairman of the Stop War Coalition. And here in Doha, Najeeb Al-Nuaimi is the former Minister of Justice for Qatar and a former defense attorney for several of the Guantanamo Bay detainees. He also runs the Arabian Gulf Forum for Human Rights. Thank you, gentlemen, all for being with us on the programme today. Mr. Al-Nuaimi, let me begin with you, first of all, if I might. The proceedings in Guantanamo Bay, you're familiar with, having dealt with a number of the inmates there. So just as a general observation, tell us what you think of these proceedings that are now getting underway.
Well, the procedure actually established as an extraterritorial law, and it's not really a sovereign law because Guantanamo is a rented area and a military base. So it has been created, in fact, but it does not go and comply with the international humanitarian law. The procedures that's there, limit very much the defense on their questionnaires and limit their time to present themselves. Yesterday, they spent about 13 hours, and they just been adjourned until the 12th of next month.
Now, the situation is that the defendants, as we've heard, have refused to even comment, let alone enter a plea. So on a legal situation, what is the next stage? Now, the judge is therefore obliged to enter a plea on their behalf. Is that right?
Well, they can do that under the present procedure, but that deprives the defendant from having his right really to express himself.
But if the defendant refuses, I mean, let's just concentrate on Khalid Sheikh Mohammed for a moment, because I think he's probably the most important figure of those five. Yeah. If he refuses to actually enter any plea, then the judge will have to enter one on his behalf, I suppose. I mean, if he chooses to enter a guilty plea, then there's no need for any proceedings whatsoever. We'll go straight to the death penalty, presumably.
Well, we have to understand that, anybody will be pleading guilty under certain circumstances like this. And we have seen it in other trial. It's not really admissible, since he is not really free to think and the judge himself, the right decision. So we cannot really rely on his just admitting that he was guilty or he did. He has to be, Sheikh Khalid been through 188 tortured being done. And that one is even contradict with the torture, convention. I know U.S. is not a principle for them that to lead really within the international law.
Okay. So, Jeremy Corbyn, is it even worth us discussing what the procedure might involve here? Because as Mr. Al-Nuaimi pointed out, this is a unique situation that has been tailored to the circumstances. So at the end of the day, it seems as if the result we'll get is the result that they want from the beginning. So what's the point of even questioning the process?
Well, the process is legally very, very flawed, and it doesn't fit in with any kind of international jurisdiction or any kind of international justice.
Right, but that, I mean, my point here being, yeah, we can argue about that. But if this is the way they want to conduct this, and this is how it will be, that's how it will be, surely.
Well, it looks to me as though they're looking to get a solution to this, which will presumably end up with a death penalty for the defendants. But my point is that people that have been all these years in detention, under torture, without proper legal representation, in no other jurisdiction that has any international standing or renown, would they even be able to get into court? Because under, for example, the European conventions, it would not be possible to put somebody on trial after they'd been tortured and held in detention for, in some cases, 10 years.
Richard Weitz, is there a possibility that some of this evidence may actually be admissible? I mean, if the judge chooses to enter a not guilty plea on their behalf, and we do go through a criminal process, is there a possibility that somewhere along the line, some of these actions that have been filed by the defense lawyers may bring to light what the government is trying to suppress?
I just want to back up and give a little context here. There is no good solution for the situation we have. The imperative after 9/11 was to capture the terrorists and not to put them and give them a fair trial and determine their guilt or innocence. The imperative was to find out what was happening, when the next attack would occur, how to break apart al-qaeda, and in the process, they probably violated what people would commonly consider to be due process of law. We've got this tension inherent in what's going on now with the FBI or perhaps some other judicial agency saying, well, we need to be careful, we have to consolidate evidence, we want to let's string along the terrorism action a little longer to get more evidence, whereas the security people say, no, we got to stop it, this is dangerous, let's just take them now. And this is the beginning of when this process began to make clear how the difficulties involved. So the imperative appears to have succeeded. Al-Qaeda has been seriously degraded. Now we're trying to walk this backwards and try and give them some kind of trial. But I think everyone can agree there's just no good solution. I mean, President Obama tried to close Guantanamo. He wanted to have the trial in the U.S. There was opposition, so we're going to do it there. The initial procedures were thought to be too unfair to defendants, so they canceled those and have been trying to redo them. But there's no way, given what happened, we can walk this back to a perfectly fair trial. That said, the reason why they're being so cautious is because there is some concern that they could be found not guilty because of what's happened before, and that is a distinct possibility. It's not foreordained they're going to be sentenced guilty or they'll be sentenced to death. And as your question implied, there's also a concern on the part of the government's part that some of the evidence that would be revealed in the proceedings could be dangerous. It could tell terrorists, what the U.S. has been doing to try and stop them, and so on.
Okay, but look,
so there are all sorts of
we've
pitfalls in this process.
We've heard from our other two guests, though, that as far as they're concerned, and in fact, it seems as far as much of the international legal establishment is concerned, that these trials will not be fair because they don't conform to what is commonly taken as being fair judicial process, as has been built up since Nuremberg. But in the US, they don't really seem to see it that way, or seem to care that it would be that way. And in many ways, they seem to have been constructing their laws to actually make it retroactively legal to do what they're doing. Is that how they're seeing it there?
No, I think because it would have been very easy just to put them on trial and then sentence them to death if that's what they wanted to do. The problem is they are trying to make it legal. They're trying to align as far as they can with due process and civil and military law. That's why it's taken so long. That's why we've had all these fits and starts. That's why they keep on rewriting it, because people will object, this isn't fair, so they go and try and revise it. They're trying to, but I think given the background, given the context, I don't think anything anybody can do will give these people a fair trial.
Mr. Let me put that point to Mr. Al-Nuaimi. Do you agree that what the US is doing here is desperately trying to make sure that this procedure does conform to law?
I don't think so. They understand that what they're doing is really not complying with the international humanitarian law. They know that one. I've been in the Pentagon 2 times, and I had discussed the status of these guys, when they were about 750. And I tried to explain to the military there by telling them, you just hijacking anyone from Pakistan or Afghanistan, since he has that long beard and he been, praying in a mosque. And this has happened. And I demonstrated to them for a number of people who had nothing to do with al-qaeda, never even been based or shifted to any place that al-qaeda been. They were just normal civilians. Let me give you an example. Yasir Hamdi, he was being arrested. He was a young guy just hanging around in Pakistan, and he went in the wrong time when the Americans came, and he was there with the Taliban, with some guys from Taliban, and they know him as a friend. He was arrested. He been shifted to Guantanamo, and in Guantanamo, the investigator found out that he's an American because he was born in America. Then they had to be shifted from Guantanamo down to Washington, D.C., where the general attorney's guys refused to receive him as a criminal. And they said, show us, to the military, what did he do? They could not demonstrate that one. Yasir Hamdi, with the military, were really very much embarrassed. I mean, the military were very much embarrassed on the airport because the general attorney refused to receive him. What did they do for this American? They just picked him up and put him in one of the marine basement in room there and kept him there for 5 years. Yes, well, I had to go with because I represented him and through his father, and I had to go there and being in the court. I was trying to tell this guy, this man is American. You want to trial him as American? You put him in the court, trial him as American. But what evidence do you have except that he'd been arrested? He was not a member of al-qaeda. Then we had to make a deal with the Pentagon just to get this guy out. I asked his father if he'd waive his nationality as an American, and his father said, we don't want the American passport. He will waive it, and we have to show him and demonstrate to him. He ended by waiving his nationality and deported to Saudi Arabia.
Yasir Hamdi is just one case of a number that could fit into the same category. Jeremy Corbyn, what are your thoughts on the legal changes that we've seen in the US with regards to these events in the past 10 years? And do you think that the Guantanamo system is actually conforming to anything that you would recognize as being international law?
Well, you have to start at the beginning. After the awful events of 9/11, the US picked up a large number of people none of them in US jurisdictions, but in Afghanistan, Pakistan and elsewhere, took them to Guantanamo Bay, called them enemy combatants, which there is no legal definition of, kept them there, tortured them, waterboarded them, kept them in solitary confinement, initially denied them visits or legal representation, and now, all these years later, decides to put them on trial because President Obama's pledge of the last presidential election has not been carried out to close Guantanamo Bay and put them on proper trial. And so this trial is, if that's what it's to be called, is in effect a military court trying people who've been suffered torture already and therefore are not, in my view, fit to plead. I don't think anyone can be called fit to plead after that's gone through. And so I think the whole process has been very damaging to the American legal system and to the concept of the right of an independent, fair trial. And those countries that were complicit in this through the extraordinary rendition flights are also culpable in this whole process. Now, what do you do from now on? I don't think any of those people can be deemed to be fit to stand trial, and also the jurisdictions they were taken from ought to be objecting to the whole principle. Why should the US be allowed to simply arrest somebody in a different jurisdiction, fly them by various circuitous and devious routes to Guantanamo Bay, call them prisoners there, keep them there, and then eventually, after a lot of pressure, put them on a military trial? It's just not right.
Okay, well, Richard Weitz, can you offer any answers to those speculations from Jeremy Corbyn?
Well, I think that those are all good objections. I mean, the problem is neither he nor I can figure out the answer. Well, what do you do now to give them a fair trial? I don't know how you could. I mean, in the international sense, you can't. But it's not the American way just to take them and shoot them, and with the bullet in the back of the head and dump them off somewhere. And so they've got to be given some kind of trial. And so they're trying to do the best they can, given those parameters.
What about the question we brought up earlier on, though? I mean, you're suggesting that what the White House is trying to do is construct a scenario whereby something resembling a fair trial might be given to these men. But at the same time, they're constructing a whole series of laws and new scenarios which would seem to actually be retrospectively trying to justify their actions. I mean, now it's allowable for the US government to, as they call it, targeted killings against US citizens without giving any explanation and without any due process whatsoever. We've got any number of legislations for indefinite detention, all sorts of things going on here. Is that not cause for concern?
No, people are concerned. These measures are not being adopted lightly. There's been a lot. It's a vigorous debate in Congress and in the courts over what is permissible. Some actions that were taken immediately after 9/11 have now been excluded and ruled impermissible by the administration, the courts. They're trying to find the right balance, and we're continuing this debate now with respect to the drone strikes. The administration has now decided this is such an important issue that we have to openly acknowledge the United States is engaged in this, and we have to explain our justifications, and we have to do this in public forum and see the reaction and try and refine the process. None of us are happy about what's going on. I mean, it's just trying to find the best we can to balance between the imperatives of not violating people's rights and not leaving the United States vulnerable for another 9/11 attack.
Well, you say none of us are happy with what's going on, but let's just consider that question in the light of the future after this trial, because the suggestion that perhaps the fomenting of more anger against the US from this trial is one that should be taken seriously, shouldn't it? Mr. Al-Nuaimi, let me put this to you. What do you think the reaction to this kind of activity in the US is going to be, and will there be a blowback from this?
Well, I think most of people, I don't speak about in America, but most of internationally, are not happy with what's going on. We are not really happy that something happened, and they blow, these two towers. We really condemn. Everyone is condemning this, and nobody will admit that terrorists have to have a way, whatever way, either illegal or non-legal. This has to be, people, society have to be protected from terrorism. But we have to understand one thing. Now, if you want to do something, you better do it right. Because if you're a symbol of a state which is calling for all the human rights around the world, and we watch you really messing with all the legal tools and legal means, with this guy sitting in Guantanamo, how can we will really understand which side you are in? Are you really with international human rights, or you are not with international human rights? That's put the question really to the U.S. government, whether Republic or Democrats. We were happy when Bush said, "Oh, it's going to be closed and everything will be reorganized." Everybody was happy. It's a shame, anyhow. It's a very sham situation. I mean, for the U.S. Guantanamo is just a base. a military. Once I was going, I discussed to go to Cuba and sue the American there, to sue the American base, because this is actually a Cuban state. But unfortunately, the Cuban authority refused, and they said, we're not going to allow you to enter Cuba. If you're going to do that, you can come as a tourist. I said, no. I have the right to present my clients through your court because this is your jurisdiction. This is your sovereignty. I have to do that. And they refuse based on political mess, with the US.
Jeremy Corbyn, are you at all concerned that these kind of attitudes are seeping through to the UK? I mean, we saw in the case of Binyan Mohammed that maybe the British judiciary was a little bit more willing to stand up to the politicians, but the UK does generally tend to follow what DC says. Are we going to see a trend through the UK and maybe Europe too of this kind of legislation and this kind of anti-terror rhetoric and behaviour?
Ever since 2001, there's been a threat and a diminution of human rights all over the world. And the US has led the way in this by preaching human rights to the world, taking people illegally out of jurisdictions, putting them in prison and torturing them. And we've had anti-terror legislation in the UK, which has included the ability of the state to impose executive detention on people, including special immigration appeals courts, where there is very limited evidence available to the defendant, and indeed very limited communication between the barrister, the defendant's legal representative, and the defendant themselves, as well as the judge. And so we've had this threat, and indeed, to some extent, most European countries have changed for the worse their rights to open, fair and free trials. There are also numbers of people held on immigration detention almost indefinitely because they cannot be returned to the jurisdiction that they've originally come from, because they are not complicit with the UN Convention on Torture, hence the standoff at the moment over the al-qaeda case between Britain and Jordan. And I think we need to use this opportunity to assert the international legal rights. Now, why, for example, can't the US sign the International Convention on Torture? Why can't the US join the International Criminal Court? Why can't we go forward with the Western countries and others asserting international law rather than this dreadful process that's going on in the USA, which is actually very damaging to justice in the USA as a whole?
Well, Richard Weitz, I mean, that these are concerns, it would seem, that are really being voiced all over the world, and yet in the US what we've had only yesterday was one of the major commentators on the right, William Crystal, writing in the Washington Post that he thinks that the war on terror is not over at all. In fact, let me quote him. He says, "The war in which we are engaged won't end with peace in or withdrawal from Afghanistan. From Pakistan in the east to Tunisia in the west, we are at war with political Islamism." It would seem as if the trend is going on, and the outlook would be bleak, wouldn't it?
Well, there's a wide range of views on these issues in the United States and elsewhere. I mean, people understand that the threat of terrorism is enduring. It's partly technological, related to the privatization of violence, and there are other reasons which we can go into. But that's why people are struggling so hard with these issues about how do you try terrorism, when you can use preemptive strikes, because people are concerned that if this is going to be an enduring issue, we have to get the balance right, recognizing the balance can change over time. So perhaps the threat is less now, so we can relax some of the measures that were adopted soon after 9/11. These are momentous issues, and everybody's struggling with them, trying to figure out what the best solution is. So I wouldn't take it for granted that Americans aren't uncomfortable with some of the things that have been going on, and they're just trying to find out the best route they can given some of the imperatives that we face.
All right, one final word, Mr. Al-Nuaimi. What do you think will be the result of this Guantanamo Bay proceeding? Will Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and his co-defendants be found guilty, and what will be their fate?
Well, I would think that they will be found guilty, definitely. Not because they were not, if they admitted, whatever, under what circumstances. But we have to understand one thing. This trial is unfair. it's not complying with the international human rights. These guys, whatever they did, you have to examine what was their role. You have to understand what was their status. Are they an enemy combat? Are they a civilian? Are they just, what category you are actually putting them on that? Plus that, are you really putting them on trial, which is comply with the UN charter or the UN motion, for example, which execution is forbidden, or they will be for life? Then if it's going to be for life, where are you going to be detain them? Are you going to keep them in Guantanamo?
We're going to have to
or
leave
in the
it
US?
there. Hopefully some of these questions may be answered after these processes at some point in the future. But for the moment, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you to all my three guests. In Washington, D.C., Richard Weitz. In London, Jeremy Corbyn. And here in Doha, Najeeb Al-Nuaimi. Thank you all for talking to us on this edition of Inside Story. And thank you for watching this edition. If you want to send us your feedback, you can email us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. But for the moment, from me and the team, it's goodbye.